Hello, welcome, happy Friday. Welcome to the UX Speaker Series. Sorry I missed you last week, but David took very good care of you. I am delighted to introduce this week's speaker, Rohit Sharma, and he is an alum of the master's program, hcde alum. But before that, he also spent several years at Microsoft as a program manager, so has an interesting mix of experience, pre-UX, learning about UX, and now he is a designer at Deloitte. It's actually Deloitte Digital, right?
It is,
yes,
yeah.
Okay. That part I didn't double check. And so he has a great range of experience he's going to share with you today, and with that, I'm going to let you take over.
Okay, that sounds good. Can you all hear me okay? It's good? Okay. So good morning. My name is Rohit. It's a pleasure to see some of you again. I think I recognize a few people from the hcde career fair. But it's great to be back at hcde. The last time we had speaker series, it was in a much smaller room. So this is not quite what I was expecting, but this is really nice. This is a great setup. And happy Friday. Thanks for taking your Friday lunch out to come talk to me. So before we get started on me, I would love to hear a little bit about you. Tell me, actually maybe by a show of hands, how many of you are in the master's program in hcde? Okay, cool. And what about bachelor's, PhD? Okay. And other master's programs too. And other master's programs too. Okay, awesome. From someone who's not in the hcde department in a master's program, what might that be? Any representation? Okay. Awesome. And what about first year versus second year? Maybe how many people are about to graduate this year? Couple of hands. And in their first year or not quite graduating? Okay, awesome. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Rohit Sharma, as Liz mentioned, and I graduated from UW in the master's department at hcde, and before that I did the certificate program. So the reason I got into that is I was a PM at Microsoft for a number of years. I was a PM in the Office division for 2 years, and then in advertising in 3, and I really enjoyed it. Microsoft is a really great place to start your career. I went there straight from my undergrad, and I had a really good experience. But I found that in my personal time, and sometimes in my work time when my boss wasn't looking, I would find that I would read about design for fun. Like I would go on to design blogs and I'd see what's going on in the latest Apple or Google News, or seeing things about usability. And my coworkers thought it was kind of weird. They thought it was like a weird way to spend your free time. And I realized after talking to people and meeting designers that maybe where I spend my free time is where I should be spending my career. So I went on and I did hcde. And me and hcde was a match made in heaven, and I felt like it was giving me everything I needed to succeed. So I started with 518. It was an intro to UCD. And I took that course, and I was like, this is great. There's a process for creating anything. And so I just printed that loop out, put it at my desk, and I'm like, I'm going to use this for everything. And then I took courses in theory, and I said, all right, not only are we learning HCI, and we're learning HCI theory from some really, really smart people, but I can take that and I can make my own theories out of this. And so I combine that with information visualization and usability testing, and I'm like, this is great. This is all I need. So as an example of how naive I was, this was my website the day before I graduated from hcde, and this was my website the day after I graduated from hcde. So I'm like, all right, that's set. I've got my master's. I had my certificate before that. I am totally set. But then I realized something. Shortly after working that, I was empowered with all these great skills, and I was really happy to be able to call myself a designer then, but it was just the beginning. Getting my degree in hcde and moving from my previous job as a program manager into my new work as a user experience designer, it was just the beginning of my design career. So I thought to myself a little bit that if I were to go back 2, 3, 4 years, when I was in grad school, when I was in school, what advice would I give myself, knowing what I know now as a designer? And so I packaged all that up and had a nice conversation with Liz, and that's why I'm here today, to talk a little bit about life after hcde. So my favorite podcast is This American Life, if you might have heard it, and they do a really amazing job at taking 1 hour stories and putting them into 3 acts. So I'll try to use their model the best I can. Today's talk will also be in 3 acts. The first one is an introduction to consulting. So what does that mean? What is design consulting? The next one is called Doing the Work. So whether you're a consultant or whether you're a profession in any other field, then what have I kind of seen about people who are really successful at doing the work? And the last thing is about growing your career. Now, I'm just getting started as a designer, but I'm really fortunate to work with really, really amazing people. And what are the things I've seen in them, and what have they done to grow their career that I can hope to emulate, and what lessons from that would I like to share with you? Before we go too deep into it, just a note that I don't mean this to be a monologue at all. I will pause at the end of every act if there's any questions, and I know we have questions at the end as well, but if you have any burning ones throughout, or if I say something that you totally disagree with or you really love, then feel free to just put your hand up and we can talk about that, because I'm here for you. So, Act 1, being a consultant. So if you were to go to Deloitte Digital's website and you ask them, like, what is design consulting? You'll probably see something like this. We find value in the intersection between business and consumers, and all that is totally true. But if you talk to my manager, he'll say it's something like this: give me your boring. Now, what does that mean, give me your boring? It means that if you're a business, or you're a university, or you're anyone doing anything, you probably have something that's your passion, something that you want to focus on. And there's a lot of other things you probably have to do to realize that vision. And some of those things you might not like, or some of those things you need guidance on. And that's where companies like Deloitte Digital come in. So for example, if you're Tom's, then your passion might be creating footwear and using that to empower others and bring forward equality. But your passion is not making responsive websites. Your passion is not making apps. So Deloitte Digital can help with that. Or maybe you're Showtime, and your passion there is to create entertainment, and you want to create your own programming, share it with the world, but you don't want to worry about if your server is up at 3 in the morning. You don't want to worry about the user experience of your Apple TV app. So we worry about that. You probably have heard of Deloitte as a company overall, and it might be worth noting that Deloitte Digital is a design studio within Deloitte. So it's still part of Deloitte. When you said it was Deloitte, there's nothing incorrect about that. But we're a studio within Deloitte, and we focus on these sorts of things. So one other recent example is massage therapy. So we had a recent client who was really on the top of their field, and this was my first project at work. So I learned all about their business, and I learned about what the benefits of massage therapy are. And I learned that it's a lot more than just relaxation, and there's a lot of good that people do. For clients who have arthritis, for sports injuries, for all these things, there's actually healers out there that can help them. And this particular business was doing a great job at that. But their boring was all this stuff. So it was a huge business, and they had a lot of clients, and all that translated into a lot of paperwork. And even though they had a business model where you could go to any one of their locations and you could receive the same services, it was kind of like your doctor's office, where it was locked behind a lot of paperwork. So that was the perfect opportunity for a company like us. We built 3 things. We built an internal system, so that internal system allowed them to get really organized, remove all this paperwork, use a digital format that could be taken anywhere. We created an iPhone app, and then an Android app is coming soon. And the idea with that is all that power was then in the customer's hand. You could book your appointments online, all the things you expect from your software. And then finally, we built a website. So all this was packaged up in a nice new arrangement. And how we did it was using certainly a lot of the things that we learn in hcde and in UW, a lot of our design thinking, but we also use Agile, and we also used a little bit of lean startup methodology. So this taught me something, and it brings me to my first lesson, that when we're designers, we certainly emerge with all these tools and processes from whatever program we're in, but we're usually part of a system. And so whatever you're building, whether it's software, or whether it's hardware, you're probably part of a larger ecosystem of people working together, and it's very important to know what that system is. So for a lot of you, you might be finishing this program, and you might be changing to a new job, or you might be going into a different type of work within your same company. And if you do that, knowing how design fits into the big picture is really important. So this is a very abbreviated look at it, but a company like Deloitte Digital, it's really helpful if you're talking to them to figure out how they actually do the work they do. And you'll see that design thinking is one of it, or one of the components, and we do all the same things that you studied in school, from user journeys and ideation, but then they also apply a lot of things from lean startup. And it's a great book if you have a chance to read it, and you should tell me all about it, because I've only skimmed it too. But there's a lot of good things in there about starting with this MVP, starting with the minimum viable product and scaling up from there. And then finally, we live and breathe Agile every day. And Agile, you don't have to be an expert in. It's just one way of building software. But it's helpful to know that the high-level idea is that every 2 weeks you're producing something. And there's a daily stand-up. Every day you meet with your team and you go over what you're going to accomplish for that day. You have specific roles. And you are trying to not chunk up your work and then achieve a little bit at the time, but actually create discrete units that you can solve every 2 weeks. And so we could spend an hour just talking about what Agile is, but I think the more important lesson is that whatever you're getting into, something I didn't realize is it's not enough to know what you're doing in design, but how does design fit into that larger picture? So another thing that I walked away with is I had a lot of projects in HCDE, and I was really fortunate to work with clients in some cases. One of them that I really liked was building an iPad application for moms, for new moms, and to help them with parenting and all these things. And we had a great client, and we had one person we'd meet with once a week, and we had a great interaction with them. And I'm like, great, now I'm set up to work with clients, and I know how to have dealings and how to explain design. And I walked into work, and I was faced with this. And when I walked into work, I realized that number one, you're going to have a lot of people you're working with. As the project gets bigger, your stakeholders increase in number. Your clients are going to change. And so just because if it's a 3-month project and you're working with 10 clients on the first day, by the end of that 3 months, it might be a whole new set of people. And being able to articulate your vision as the team changes is really important. And then I realized that they're not always the experts either. So I'm actually just working on a project right now where all of the clients are newer to the work than I am. And so it's a really interesting thing to figure out that they're not necessarily your experts, and they're not necessarily people that you can always count on and say, you know, you're the expert, I'm going to use your opinion. It becomes a much more collaborative thing. And so I learned as a second lesson in that, just to know my clients and to really understand where they're coming from and realize that as the work gets more complex, that relationship gets more complex too. And there's a few questions I love to ask whenever I'm starting a project that I didn't know when I first started that I know to ask now. Just knowing about who's responsible for different parts of the design, what their background is with the project, what does sign-off mean, and perhaps more importantly, or most importantly, do they know all the terms you're familiar with? So when we're in school and we're learning about wireframes and we're learning about user journeys, these things all have a specific meaning to us, but then you get into quote-unquote the real world, and they mean different things to different people. This week I was meeting with a client and we were talking all about UX design, and it wasn't until the end of the day where I realized that what I called UX design, they called visual design, and we were totally on a different page. So just setting up what the terms mean becomes a really, really important thing. But you'll do all this and you'll have a great experience with your client, and then if you're working at a design consultancy, what will probably happen is that you're on to the next project. But before you do that, I've really noticed that there is a big value in pausing and saying, whatever I did in this project, what did I learn from it? Because in your projects, there's usually not built-in time for reflection. So your team will certainly help you, and they'll say, all right, what did we learn about this project? But what about for you? What about for your career? What about for you just getting better at your craft? Is there time for reflection on that? And if there's not, it's worth asking yourself, do you know yourself in the project? What did you learn, and how will you grow from this? And what would you do differently from this? One thing we did in HCDE in Jennifer Turn's class in 502 was this idea of a reflection at the end of the course. So our final assignment, the paper that we wrote and the work that we did, there was an epilogue to that where we actually had to take all the work we had and create a site or create any kind of living, breathing artifact that summed up why we took this course, what we learned from it, what did we produce from it, and what would we learn next time. And I love this, and I put up a Tumblr page, and I wrote about my dreams of becoming a designer and how this course fulfilled it. I put up the artifacts, so we wrote a paper, and I wrote about what that was. And then I actually went back and reflected on the funny parts of the course too. Like we had a discussion board, as a lot of your classes might, and online there would be a question posted. And over time we all got wrapped up in these papers, and we kind of needed to be a little bit less serious about it sometimes. So instead of just giving like actual replies, A lot of us were on Reddit. We would start turning our ideas into memes. And I actually went back and said, you know, maybe there was some benefit to this. Maybe there wasn't just one way to communicate, but using humor was actually really useful in this circumstance. But if I hadn't taken time to reflect on that, then I might not be employing some of that now in my job. So just to sum up that first part about being a consultant, I think 3 lessons that stand out for me are just knowing the system, knowing your clients, and knowing yourself. So before we talk about doing the work, any questions about any of that so far? OK. So doing the work. One of the other courses I took in hcde that I really liked was information visualization. So in information visualization, we learned a lot about the theory and about how we perceive data and how we want to best absorb this material. Then we worked in Tableau, and in Tableau we took that and we made usable models of our data. And then we actually went one step further and had to do our own programming into it. And I was really naive, and I said, all right, well, I'm going to take the task of building our own JavaScript simulation, not knowing how to code, not knowing JavaScript, and not even really knowing what a simulation was. So I did this work, and at first it was really fun. I was like, all right, I'm learning in Code Academy, and I'm learning a new thing, and I'm applying it to the project. And the project was really successful. And I was talking to Liz about this just before. We actually published a paper from this project, and it was a really worthwhile endeavor because we produced something that was useful. The actual project we did was a visualization for behavioral psychologists, and in that we came up with a really nice visualization for some of the data, so you could track your patients not just with spreadsheets but with actual real InfoVis. But all that was great, but at the time I was really stressed about it because it felt really like a lot of work. And at times I would pause and I would say, why am I learning all these new things for just this one project? I didn't really realize the benefit of it until when I was in the workforce. And in consulting, I quickly realized that our projects change every 4 to 6 months. And everything might change. You might be working from a grocery store, working in one technology on one day, and then 4 months later, you're working with a hospital on a completely different technology. So I realized later that the InfoVis work that we did, and the fact that I was in JavaScript, and the fact that I used HighCharts as our plugin there, that wasn't as important as the idea of learning how to learn and being able to pivot quickly and pick up a new technology, immerse myself in it, learn it, and then switch off to the next thing is something that I have to do every day at work right now. And so I realized that every project I had in grad school, every project that I had in school, and even today in work, every project that I have is an opportunity to learn something new and to try something new. And this is kind of important because it's one of those things that academia kind of encourages you to do, but the workforce might not. From your employer's point of view, very rightly, they want to pick people who are good at the things they're doing. So if you say, I'm about to bring in this project and I have no idea what the technology is, that's not going to instill a lot of confidence in your employer or your clients. But if you have that attitude, at least internally, of becoming the type of person who can move quickly and keep learning, then it actually in turn benefits everybody. Because to be a great design consultant, you actually have to be really adaptable and be able to learn things quickly, even if it's something that's self-initiated. And I'm always amazed at how much support there is for this kind of self-education in the community if you just look for it. Just last month, I went to a meetup at HBO where it was a group learning Framer. And I was really amazed at this because it seemed very selfless in that the first part of the talk was people demoing the cool new things they were doing in Framer. And then the second half was all for beginners. And every month or 2 months they get together, and for half an hour experts will sit with beginners and just purely because they enjoy using this tool, teach others how to do it. So there seems to be a real environment for it that even exists out of what you might think in traditional classrooms if you just look for it. And I really think it tends to pay off in the workplace, but it's not always there for people. They don't always think about it. So one other point about working in a consulting environment, this is our office. So I encourage you to visit the next time we have an open house. We're at 2nd and Marion, and it is beautiful. So the Seattle Exchange building was no longer a stock exchange building a number of years ago, and now it's our design studio. So it's a completely open floor plan, and you'll see a lot of design studios like this, but I think ours is nicer. It's very nice, it's very bright, beautiful, collaborative. But it can also be distracting. And this is something you might not always realize or hear when you're talking to recruiters about jobs and thinking about the workplace, that it's a really great environment for collaboration, but a lot of the work that we do in design, related to design, is deep work, is really the kind of cerebral work that requires some isolation, that requires some hard thinking, and your best work might not always be achieved in this kind of open environment. And so it doesn't mean that that's not the right place to work. And I've done that, and I've had my own office, and I still prefer that. But the main lesson I walked away with is it's important to realize that there's moments where you need to work deeply. And what I mean by that is there's times where it's important to realize the work you do is really creative, and having the right environment to foster that creativity is as important as all the tools and processes and everything we learn. So you might walk away from the program you're in at UW armed with all these skills and all this information, as I felt, but if you don't have the right environment to unlock that, then it won't be of any benefit. So a book that I feel like distills this really well, that I discovered just this year, and it really encapsulates a lot of this, and I would love to tell my old self if I could go back in time, is Deep Work by Cal Newport. And he brings up a really, really nice... Has anyone read this book, by the way? Show of hands. Okay, awesome. See, it's a great book, and no one's heard of it, so I love bringing it up. But he brings up this really nice point that, on one hand, the jobs that are most important, the ones that are only going to be here, are the ones that can't be automated. So a lot of the work that we understand deeply that we can automate, it's going to get automated. So the work that remains is this so-called deep work, the work that really requires this deep engagement, this unstructured thinking, all the things that you learn in an environment like UW. But at the same time, those skills are becoming increasingly rare because we have so many distractions. There are distractions externally. It doesn't matter in an open environment or not, but you'll have lots of people competing for your attention in person and over email. And then internally too. So social media, entertainment is amazing and great, and there's so much it enables, but at the same time, it's programmed to be distracting. And that distraction can weigh heavily if it's not left in check. And so it doesn't mean that we not use these things, but it's important to think about what impact they have on us. And just thinking about simple things you can do to unlock an environment where you have deep work happening can have a huge power to it. And he talks about things like you only have a limited capacity for deep work in a day. Some studies show that you have about 4 hours of really hard, intense thinking you can do in a day before you need a break and before you can break, sleep, and come back to it the next day. So if you're working in something like an open environment, you can easily find times where you can put your headphones on, get into a room, and just find moments to immerse yourself in that work, and then that's all you need, and that's all it takes. But not having that awareness, you'll find that that's when people slip into working in the evenings or working on the weekends or not realizing why work takes so long. It's because they haven't thought about this stuff. A book that Deep Work heavily relies on that I also always recommend is Flow. Flow is one of those books that I first read and realized that this seems to be like the meaning of life, about fulfillment and engagement and happiness, but we don't seem to apply it much, and you don't see this mentioned a lot. So while this doesn't relate directly to the idea of deep work, and it just underpins some of it, if you're thinking about full engagement and you're thinking about showing up and being your best at work, sources like this are worth looking at. One thing I want to talk about at work that we do is this idea of user journeys. So just shifting a little bit away from the earlier point, a lot of work we do with our clients is strategy, and we think about sitting with the client and saying, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? And if you've built user journeys in your school projects or in your actual work today, then you might be familiar with this. And we look at those pain points. An example I love to bring up is what's brought in this book called If Disney Ran Your Hospital. And in this book, they talk about how take whatever your business is and then apply a completely different model to it and see what happens. And you can very clearly infer just from the title, if Disney running a hospital, what kind of environment would that be? And although that's completely unrealistic, it starts to really uncover some of the things that you value and you'd want to give to your patients. And you can just keep applying that over and over again in different iterations. What if Starbucks sold vacuum cleaners? What if Apple sold hair dryers? Like, you can keep tilting on that, but the important thing is not this exercise. There's tons of creative exercises that you will do with your clients if you're in a design consulting environment. The important thing is that the more experience you have outside of design, the more things you can speak to, the more it can help you in these brainstorming environments. So as I very articulately put this lesson, the idea is to learn other stuff. And so the general thinking, and I've observed this a lot of my colleagues, is the people who have different experiences outside of design, when they can bring those experiences into the design world, into brainstorming, then that makes everything better. And it's interesting because the actual experience doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if you're playing sports or you're hiking or you're really into card games or gaming or even your television shows or books. But the idea that you've thought about this experience and you've thought deeply enough that you can connect it to whatever work you're doing has a real power to it. And it's really interesting because I realize that it's not enough to learn about the experience of the project you're working on, the problem you're trying to solve, or whatever the methods and tools you learned in school, but can you connect those to other things? And if you work in an environment like design consulting, a lot of the work you do is connecting with other people. And those connections are formed on some kind of common ground. And the more points that you can draw on to create that common ground, the better that relationship will be, and the better the outcome of your project. So to wrap up that second part, this idea of doing the work, the main 3 lessons that came out from it were just learning a little bit about how to learn, this idea of really working deeply and finding the time for that, and then finally learning other stuff. And so the last part, just to bring this to the close, is this idea of growing your career. And as I mentioned, growing your career is a very broad idea, and I don't mean to say that after beginning my design career I'm in any position to guide everyone else's. But I'm very fortunate to be around people who've done really well in their careers, to have them as mentors and to learn from them. And also over the span of this past almost 2 years at Deloitte, seeing what things seem to work well for growth. And I'd like to share that a little bit. So just to take a step back at what got me into hcde, I remember being at Microsoft and reading about hcde and wondering what it was about and if it was the right program for me. And I did this thing where I would look up a little bit about people who graduated from hcde and then find out who was working at Microsoft and then email them and say, hey, you're working as a designer at Microsoft and I'd like to learn more about what you did at hcde and you found a benefit. I think I emailed about 10 people and one of them replied, and this person used to be a program manager at Microsoft and then he moved into design. And it was great. We'd never met each other before. I went to his office, we had coffee, and he told me all about hcde, and he gave me the recommendation to go to CHI, to the Computer Human Interaction Conference, which I thought was an interesting recommendation, but I went with it, and then it was good advice because I met many people from hcde. I realized it was a great environment to be in, and then I decided to take one course, and that one course became the certificate went to the master's, and that got me into design. So the person I met at Microsoft, his name is Mike Berg. And Mike Berg you might be familiar with because he is faculty here at UW. And since being at Microsoft, he's moved on to bigger and better things in his work. And he's one of those people where it's just great to be connected to. Now, Mike Berg is a funny example because he's kind of like the Kevin Bacon of UX in Seattle. If you're never going to be more than 6 steps away from Mike if you're involved in any UX capacity. But there's a general lesson here, the idea of staying connected. And there is a lot of great work happening in globally and especially in Seattle in UX. And a lot of it is happening because of the connections. And it doesn't have to be an uncomfortable networking kind of thing. It can be a very positive environment of just genuinely connecting with others. And then if you maintain that connection, seeing where that happens for you. So I can definitely speak to the fact that Mike was the reason I decided to go into hcde, and it was a huge part of my career. And then when I was in hcde, one of my teammates in a project is the one who referred me for Deloitte Digital, and that's the reason I'm over there. And I think if you step back and you talk to lots of people about why they got into their careers and why they do the work they do, there's certainly a passion for the work, but that passion is often found in conversation with others and working with others and then continuing that relationship in different capacities. I was just at a client recently and I was looking, and he was a UX manager and he was working at a company and he had all the people he's been working with, and they'd been working together across 3 different companies for many years. And this is a situation you see come up over and over again. I think that there's a lot of different paths to having a great career, but something that seems to come up often is just finding great environments with great people to work with, doing good work with them, and then staying connected and seeing where that work leads each other. And hcde and a lot of programs at UW are a great environment for that because you have design projects, you work with people, and then you move on. but people have a great memory about who they like to work with. And there's a lot of research to support this too. This specific article isn't the best one, but there's lots of ones out there with this idea that people generally love to work with people that they like. And it's kind of scary how big a predictor it is that when, especially in consulting type environments, when you have some choice of who you're working with and what projects you pick up, more than your aptitude for the subject, more than your educational background and your this and that, people always tend to favor others they like working with. And it doesn't mean that work is a popularity contest, but it does mean that you want to find the people you like working with, you want to find the environments you are happy in, and then nurture them and extend those connections, and that will lead to more and more great work. Along with that, we also talked about reflection from 502, and reflecting on the process becomes a really important thing, and just thinking about like what's working well at work, what's not, and with your connections there. Okay, so I spoke about Mike Berg, and in mentioning great people that are great mentors at UW, I couldn't, or connected to UW, I couldn't hesitate to mention Ashby. So Ashby and I worked together at Deloitte Digital, and one of the things that Ashby did that was really interesting was, I mentioned before, we had lean UX and design thinking and agile and all these great things that we apply at Deloitte and lots of consulting companies do. She looked at that and said, okay, well, that's actually really, really helpful, but maybe we could turn this into something that's even more usable for our clients. And something I tend to notice about people who are really successful, definitely in UX, and it seems to be in a lot of different fields, is they look at not only the work that they're doing, but then how the work itself is being done. And people like Ashby tend to have a strategy. So she'll look at all the different tools we have, all the different processes we have, and then she'll think about our clients, and she actually created something that would be user-centered for them too. And so I would love to have Ashby in here and talk about the details of it, and she does give talks about this, and so I would definitely look out for that. But what she did was she took the UCD method, then connected it with other things that we use like Agile, came up with a step-by-step, I think 1 month plan where you can iterate through these things, and then actually came up with a whole bunch of detailed statistics to talk about the ROI of it. So when Ashby meets with a client and she talks about the need for UX, she doesn't say it because it's just good for the business or just good for them. She says it's good business. She can actually explicitly say what the cost will be financially for not employing UX versus employing it. And those are really hard arguments to refute. It doesn't mean that you have to use this system, but it does mean that people like Ashby can be really effective in their careers by thinking about how they do the work and not just the work itself. And one last person I wanted to mention was Surya Venka. And so Surya, if you haven't met him before, you should. He is wonderful. He actually looks like this in real life. And when Ashby hosted World Usability Day late last year, you might have heard him speak as the closing keynote. Surya was one of the directors of UX, or the director of UX at Microsoft, and he's done a lot of really great work. And one of the things he does now is he thought about the system of usability, about user-centered design, and he was applying it to software, but he said it could be applied to lots of different places. And what he's done since then is he keeps refining the way he works in teams and creates design and creates design thinking. And he runs these things called design swarms. So a lot of the ideas we have now, he runs them in these workshops. And if you look up design swarms, you can find them all over the world, and they happen in Seattle too. And in these design swarms, they pick up a really challenging project. What Surya likes to call wicked problems. It might be homelessness, it might be earthquake relief, it could be anything that seems really difficult to solve. Then he'll take a team, train them in design thinking, and then over one day actually make concrete progress towards solving that problem. And this is his job now. He runs this as a workshop, and he's always overbooked because he's always going around the world and running these kinds of workshops. So it's really inspiring what people have found in their UX careers and where you can take these tools and apply them. This idea of seeking meaning. And I think it's a really important one to pause on, because as you get deeper and deeper into an expertise in your field related to usability, in your field related to user experience, then there's a lot of cool technology out there, and you're going to get into VR and AR and all these things. But there's also real benefit to think of what users are underserved and where all the work you can do be best applied for them. One of my coworkers and mentors at Deloitte, Kelly, she does this wonderful thing where no matter what project she's on, it doesn't matter what the system is, what the client is, she will make it her thing to add accessibility to the project. So this screenshot is of Google's guided access system, and so this woman is taking a picture of her dog just with her voice. And Kelly will show videos like this to our clients, regardless of the project, and inspire the need for accessibility with them. And she'll speak about it with a very business practical way. She'll say that, I mean, there's good reasons to add accessibility to reach all your users, but she has a real passion about it too, that whatever work she does, no matter where she does it, has to have meaning, and a way of finding that meaning is through accessibility. So just to wrap up that part, in growing your career, the ideas, the main lessons I walked away with were to stay connected, to have a strategy, and to seek meaning. And before I close, and before we get to the last questions, I just wanted to say one more thing. So one of the things that I learned to do as an adult that I didn't do as a kid was learning how to swim. As a kid, I was a real brat. My parents wanted me to learn how to swim, and I always said no, and they said, fine, you can do it when you want. And then when I was an adult, and I realized that this is a really unfortunate situation, I need to learn how to swim. And so I took, my goal was, I'm not a swimmer, and now I have to become a swimmer. So I joined a class, and they were a lot of fun, and most of the lessons looked like this. But somehow from that, we emerged as successful swimmers. But then I realized then that actually the framework was wrong. There's not really a distinct line between being a non-swimmer and being a swimmer. It's kind of a huge range, and as soon as I became comfortable diving into the deep end, I realized that, well, what about lake swimming, and what about deeper diving, and what about open water swimming, and all these things that I'd never even thought about, and I realized there's huge room to grow. And so then as I think about my career in design as well, when I started grad school, the idea was I'm not a designer, and now I have to become a designer. And it's really not that at all. It's a much bigger spectrum, and there's a lot of expertise you can gain. But at the same time, I didn't learn to swim for all these years, and I found this group called Miracle Swimming. And in Miracle Swimming, their approach was radically different, where instead of having months and months of lessons, it was 2 weekends of intensive swimming. Each weekend was like 20 hours, and then after that, it unlocked a huge potential. So hcde and a lot of other related programs at UW are the same way, in that they can really radically unlock your ability that's there, and there's a real power to them. That's not it. That's the beginning of your journey, but having that as your beginning, it really, I think, makes anything possible. Thank you for your time. So I welcome any questions about Deloitte, about anything I've covered, anything at all. I'm not sure if that's a question. Yes. Sure. Okay. I will answer what I think the question is, and then let me know if it's not. So staying connected. So Deloitte Digital is a global company. Although each city is run individually, we're part of a larger fabric. My wife and I were on vacation last year, and we went to Scandinavia, and one of the countries we visited was Sweden. And so I looked up where the Deloitte Digital Studio was there, and I went for lunch with the team, and then I joined their design meeting over there. And I met with this group of designers who luckily all spoke English as well as Swedish, and then we went over how they do work and how we do work where we are. And I'm still connected with them today, and we still share things back and forth. We shared how we look for candidates and how we recruit, and then they did the same thing. And I don't know if it lies in our future of moving away to Sweden, but what it does mean is that it's created a connection where there wasn't one before, and it's possible that I might have people who are going to work in that part of the world one day, or vice versa, and who knows what that'll enable. So maybe does that help think about the global part of it?
Yeah, totally.
Cool. That's a really, really good question. And I wish I could tell you that all of it was planned, and I made this deck 5 years ago, and this was what I was striving towards, but it wasn't. And oh, sure, I'm sorry. So the question was, of all the things I talked about, was this an intentional plan? And did I map out the strategy from the beginning? Or did it kind of come together as it went, and was it more informal? Would you say that wraps it up? So my answer to that is, I would love for it to be a very intentional plan. But I think the best quote is, I think Steve Jobs gave this in one of his commencement addresses, where he said, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. So it's very nice to go back and reflect. And as I reflect now, I think there were things that led to how this thing progressed. But it really wasn't, I don't think, intentional at that time. When I was a program manager at Microsoft, I liked what I did to keep at it enough. But I didn't know what that next step would be for a long time. All I did was just find what I was interested in and then find people who were doing that work and have conversations about it. So I still don't think things are really intentional right now. And I still don't know exactly what that future plan is. Now I try to be a little bit more intentional about making some future plans, but I also know they can fall apart really easily too. And I'm totally okay with the idea that I might not know exactly what's out in the future until it's already there. But at that time, you end up kind of looking back and figuring out what the steps were. Now I can look back and I can say, okay, I met with Mike, and then I had a coworker who works at Deloitte, and that's how it came together. But at that time, I was just meeting people for coffee and following my intuition. Yes?
Can I follow?
Sure. So the question was it intentional for me to move from Microsoft in a product company into a consulting company, and what's the difference? So my intention was never to leave Microsoft per se and go into something else. The way I did it was in this super nerdy way. I made a spreadsheet, and then in the spreadsheet I listed down all the activities I like to do. So I like sketching, and I like programming, and I like thinking about design, and I like singing, like whatever I had, right? And it was ridiculous. And then what I did was I made a list of all the different jobs I could do, including not doing a job, starting my own company, everything. And then I rated each of those options on each of those categories and assigned them a weight. And then one of the companies I was looking at, just from a referral from a friend, was Deloitte Digital. And so mapping all those out, it seemed like Deloitte Digital was the best option for me. So I was moving towards that, primarily because getting into hcde and then wanting to apply what I learned, I wanted to be in an environment where I could keep trying new things rapidly. So Deloitte Digital really enabled that for me, because since I've joined, I have 4 different projects and 4 different technology in 4 different cities and 4 different domains and all that stuff. So that's what I needed right then. In terms of it being different from Microsoft, it's tricky to answer that because Microsoft, I learned, is enormous. And so I worked in Microsoft Office and I worked in Microsoft Online, and those are nothing like SQL Server, and they're nothing like Xbox. The only common thread I can say is that Microsoft is a product company, so it has really great opportunities if you know you want to focus on something. And perhaps it's in my future again. Perhaps after working with clients in a particular area for a while, I'm really going to want to focus on that, and it makes sense for me to return to Microsoft. But for the time being, having that variety is really important to me and that quick growth, and I'm finding that at Deloitte. I hope that helps to answer that. Cool. Yes? Yes and no. Okay. So it does when there's an appreciation for it. I think 5 years ago, it was harder to fight for design sometimes in an environment, especially at companies that were very engineering focused in their roots. There might not be, like, why are we spending time doing wireframes and personas and things like that? If you have some awareness of design through a workshop or something like that, then I think it can overcome some of those hurdles. But there's also a danger, and if you look around online, you'll see a lot of people talking about this, where you do a little bit of design and then you think, okay, that's enough. Now I have everything I need. And that's kind of what I thought of with this talk. Like, even going through such an amazing program like hcde, it was enough to get me into the position where I'm working in design, but it wasn't enough to say that I'm a great designer. That required lots and lots of experience, and who knows if we ever get to that point, but there's an importance to acknowledge that. So to answer your question, and sorry to not say it earlier, about whether having these kinds of workshops and immersive things is good or bad for kind of the state of education and design, I guess it's kind of both. It's good to have that awareness, but at the same time, whoever's instilling that education, it's important for them to acknowledge the fact that it's really just the beginning. And luckily, that's something that happened in swimming too, where they told us that now you can confidently dive into the deep end, but it's going to go away in a few weeks if you don't keep it up. So, yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And hopefully I will see you again at a future hcde event.